Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. We have a special episode today as we have Kaleb Unger from Quad Culture on. Kaleb, thanks for coming on, man.
You so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk some sports with somebody and not just to myself.
Yeah, it gets a little boring just kind of staring yourself down in the camera and ranting about sports. You started your own social media kind of company, and you've been not company but account. You've been
Mhm.
working on that. Quad Culture, I believe, is what it's called. Can you tell our
Yeah.
audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, so quad culture is just basically all the like little stuff that I'm interested in. So it's movies, music, TV, and sports. And so it's just content variety from all sorts of places, whether it's movie reviews or, talking about the newest stuff that's coming out on TV, or you like a new album, or I did my NFC AFC predictions the other day. So it's just kind of it's all the little stuff that I like to talk about. So I feel like most people like one of those four things. So if you want to get content on that, it's a good place to stop.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I would highly recommend, if you're looking to chop it up, that's what I talk about. Go check out Kaleb. He does a really good job making content over there. So it was a big week in college football, a lot of crazy games, a lot of close calls. If you're Notre Dame and your call was way too close. But let's stop. Let's start it off in the morning slate on the prime time game. College game day was there. Texas, Michigan. This game went how I expected it to be. I think a lot of people were shocked about it. I'm not sure why. But I want to get your take on this game.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you watched like Michigan last week, or this Michigan team is just not what they were last year. They don't have the same guys, especially offensively. Like if you watch that game, they don't have any confidence in who they're throwing to outside of Loveland.
Yeah, I just felt like, offensively coming into the game, they were pretty one-dimensional. I knew they were going to be pretty reliant on Donovan Edwards in that run game. I just don't think Davis Warren has the arm talent to really push the ball down the field and be a threat. And then when Alex Orji comes in, automatically that it's a designed run. And I just felt like that was going to limit this Michigan offense. And that's what ended up to be the case. And early on, they talked about that Michigan defense and how they could keep them in the game. And if they could turn Texas over, that they'd be able to keep the game close and give their offense a chance to win. But I just think Texas offense is at a different level this year. Last year, we understand they had Xavier Worthy and AD Mitchell, but to bring in Isaiah Bond to replace those guys, that Ewers and Bond connection has been money all season long so far in these early weeks.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think like are you confused why they're not starting Alex Orji? Because like I'm confused.
Yeah, I thought he was the guy like all summer long. I was like, okay, like they're gonna say there's a competition, then they're gonna go with him, and they didn't, and that just kind of shocked me. So I don't know if there's something like if he really just can't throw the football, but I have a hard time believing that Davis Warren just has that much better of an arm because I was not impressed yesterday at all.
And it kind of like you talked about earlier, I feel like he fits their mentality so much better. Like they want to be this like we're gonna run the ball, we're gonna play defense, we're gonna win games, 20-17, things like that. And so it's like, why are you bringing in this guy?
Yeah, it made no sense to me. I remember last year when they brought this guy in because they bring him in a couple of times for like QB
Hmm.
draws and stuff. I was like, oh, this guy is going to be legit. Like, he gets another year under his belt, championship experience. Like, he's a tank. And for whatever reason, like, they just decided to go away from that. And it was just Texas from start to finish in this game. I mean, Texas was dominant, and Michigan just couldn't get anything going. And I don't think it's simply just a quarterback problem for Michigan. Look at their offensive line. They showed the graphic yesterday where they go from almost 140 combined starts down to like 65 on the offensive
Yeah.
line. So it's hard to win games, especially in the Big Ten or when you're playing SEC teams like Texas. You have an offensive line that's young and inexperienced. You're going to struggle to find any rhythm, and we saw that yesterday.
Well, and I feel like Texas almost was able to like flip their like hard nosed defensive mentality on them. Like, what was it? There's the play where there was kind of like a late hit on Ewers, and then like the offensive lineman got a flag because he got like in the face of the defensive lineman that did it, and it was just like it just seemed like Texas kind of had a little bit more toughness than they did.
Yeah, I agree. I even felt like after the first possession where Texas marched down, the touchdown gets called back, and then they missed the field goal. I was still like, okay, they're going to be able to move the ball against this defense. And credit to Michigan's defense. I actually thought they were solid early on, but they were just on the field way too much. And when you're playing a team like Texas, you're going to get worn down pretty quick. especially when you're playing against the offensive coordinator or I guess head coach, but play caller nonetheless. Like Sark, he's just gonna wear you out pretty easy.
Yeah, they just the offense did not do the defense any favors. I feel like Michigan still could be like one of those like back end playoff teams, but they're not really as good as I think Michigan fans would want you to think that they are.
That's where I had them at. I had Michigan, I think around the 10 to 11 range. I just think, maybe they give Ohio State a run for their money. So I mean, if they come out of the Big Ten and they're a three-loss team with losses to Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas, those are all probably top five, top seven teams. So maybe the resume shapes out the way they want it, but I could easily see them getting throttled in all three of those games and just the committee being like, there's no point. Team can't win a
Yeah.
big game this season. Well, moving on from that, we had some crazy games in that noon to 2 o'clock slate. Kansas State was on upset alert. Oklahoma State was in the shootout, and Penn State avoided a big upset from Bowling Green. Which one of those games stood out the most to you? I mean, take your pick. They were all insane.
I mean, like I think the least fun one was probably like the Penn State one, but that was the one that was like the most concerning because like the whole idea of this extended playoff for so many people seems like it's going to be like Penn State's finally going to get in because they're always in that like whatever that like 6 to 12 range. It seems like at the end of the year when like the rankings come out, and I keep hearing about okay, this is a great recruiting class for Penn State and all these different things, and I just they got to do something like they can't keep playing like this.
Yeah, I checked in yesterday because I obviously Texas and Michigan wrapped up. I was finishing up notes on that. I go on ESPN and there's like three teams in the top 15 that are all either like losing or down three or tied or whatever. And I look at Penn State and I go, oh, great. Here we go. They have a great win last weekend in Morgantown. And they're going to come home. They're going to drop one to Bowling Green at home. And Bowling Green had their chance for those that didn't watch the game. They were down, I think it was three. It could have been seven, but either way, one possession game. And they threw back to back interceptions that would have either tied it or gave them the lead. And when you're a young team or an underdog like that, you just can't afford to turn the ball over late in the game. But they had a chance. And so I'm a Penn State fan that I'm definitely not walking away from that game. Too.
And I mean, the big thing is their home field advantage. Like Happy Valley is one of like the hardest places to play, and it's just I was like an afternoon game against Bowling Green should be won after you just had a pretty good win against Power Five conference team. You should show up and get that.
Yeah, I think maybe the Penn State problem is that they have to play their games at night. Maybe if it's not dark at Happy Valley, they're destined. Like maybe the sunlight, maybe like vampire, like the sunlight is the problem. They're at home and the sun is
True.
out. It's like they're in trouble. Another game that was pretty wild. I don't know if you caught it, but Oklahoma State, Arkansas, double OT. Both teams missed their field goal in overtime, and then Oklahoma State stopped Arkansas on 4th and 1 after scoring a touchdown to seal the deal in Stillwater. Pretty sloppy game, I felt like, from both teams. But for those that have been following Oklahoma State, it was a game that we expect to see from them a lot. High scoring, a lot of somewhat sloppy or just crazy football. They were able to turn Arkansas over 3 times, and then just a big second half offensively that allowed them to pull ahead with the win.
Yeah, I mean, I got to watch a little bit of it, especially some of the highlights. Oklahoma State, I think that's a bigger win than I think most people would think, just because I think Arkansas is usually a team that's a pretty competitive SEC team, like maybe not in the top half, but definitely close. And so I thought that was a good game, a good one for them to win, especially in the early part of the season.
Yeah, I think anytime you get those preseason or non-conference games and going up against whether it's Big 12 SEC or it's SEC Big 10, no matter how good those teams are, it's a higher quality game than if you're playing, a FCS school or a Power Five or a non-Power Five school. I did
Yeah.
feel like Oklahoma State's offense in the first half. I mean, they got shut out. The only reason they had a touchdown was from a pick six thrown by Taylon Green. But I felt like offensively in the second half, they were able to find the rhythm a little bit. They had a cup. Arkansas muffed a punt and missed a field goal back to back, and that really opened the door for the Cowboys to take advantage. But for the most part, Ollie Gordon was really quiet, and that was something that was interesting to me because coming into the season, there's so much hype around this guy and how good he was going to be and how he could carry Oklahoma State to a Big 12 championship. Um, and up until the second overtime, he hadn't really done anything. He'd been kind of a non-factor. And so credit to Arkansas's defense there for finding a way to stop him. Ultimately, they had their opportunities to win the game, but just couldn't get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, that was just kind of like my overall perspective is it's just kind of like good win for Oklahoma State. Arkansas is just kind of like you got to finish that game if you're going to be competitive, and if you're that coach, you want to keep your job, and you can't lose that one.
Yeah. Well, Oklahoma State, excuse me, wasn't the only Big 12 team that was on the fringe of losing. Close one. Kansas State went down to Louisiana in Tulane, and Tulane gave them everything they could handle. Darian Mensah and that Tulane offense was dangerous. They were putting up points. Really, the deciding factor, in my opinion, was that strip sack about halfway through the fourth quarter that K State was able to return for a touchdown. I felt like up until that point, Tulane had all the momentum. Their offense was in rhythm, and they were marching down to put up another 7 on the board when Kansas State gets a big sack and runs it back for a touchdown that didn't necessarily seal the game, but definitely um, put a lot of pressure on Tulane to move the ball down the field. You can just feel that Tulane offense tighten a little bit. They're young. They're not used to those big time games quite yet. And so to me, that play really won the game for Wildcats. But maybe you have a different outlook on that.
Yeah, I of this game, I like K State. I like Avery Johnson. Like I know they lost Will Howard, and that's like a bummer that he went to Ohio State. But I think Avery Johnson might even be like better than him. And so I just feel like he brings such a dynamic aspect to this offense. And it seems like that team really like rallies around him. And so I like Kansas State to kind of be maybe one of the final two teams when you're looking at the Big 12 with them in Utah.
Yeah, I picked them to win the Big 12 in my preseason top 12 that I did. I actually had them to win for the same reason as you. I think Avery Johnson's it. And I think when you look at the run game with DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards, that perfectly complements a young quarterback that can also run. And you have kind of a two-headed monster in that backfield. We saw Giddens in the receiving game as well. He had that nice little wheel route for a touchdown. And so I think Kansas State's offense is really dynamic. And, maybe their defense isn't great, but if they can make plays like they did last night, then they're going to be able to be in a position to win a Big 12 championship, in my opinion.
I feel like it's one of those things where this was like out of all these games that were really close, like if you're doing like your like freak out meter, like this was the one that was probably the lowest of all of these close games for the top teams, just because they're so young and their quarterback is so young that it's like this is a team I could see developing to the point that later in the season, if they replayed this game, they'd win it by like 20.
Yeah, and especially in the Big 12, I just think you always see those games where it's like, oh, Kansas State won 45-42 against whoever. Oklahoma State just kicked a field goal to win it in the eighth overtime. Like that's just what you see. The Big 12, it's madness always.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Big 12 and speaking of madness, there was a whooping that went down in Lincoln, Nebraska last night. I couldn't have picked this game more wrong. I had the Buffs going into Nebraska, excuse me, and knocking off Nebraska. I thought that the experience of Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter was going to be enough. I thought we were going to see deep plays down the field. I thought they were going to air it out, and ultimately their experience was going to be able to lift them over the Cornhuskers. And that was not the case from the gun, in my opinion. Nebraska set the tone early that they're just going to out physical them. They're going to win at the line of scrimmage. There's going to be in your face, run the ball. And Dylan Raiola, he's that dude. I mean, we knew how good he was coming in, but just in the first quarter of the game, I was so surprised at how poised he was in the pocket, how he was able to step up and be composed, just not try to do too much. And in a big game like that, I think you don't always do that from young quarterbacks. I think a lot of times they try to do too much. And I feel like he was awesome. Maybe the box score, doesn't say that he had a crazy game, but for those
Yeah.
that watched it, he did exactly what he needed to do.
I'm not super high on Colorado. Like I think they have a lot of aspects like Shadur and Travis Hunter that really make them super flashy, but the line of scrimmage battle like you talked about did not go their way. But really like fundamentally, I thought they got beat in almost like every phase of the game, especially in that first half. Like their skill positions are their strength, and their wide receivers were dropping balls. Like the DBs weren't having very good close coverage. Like they didn't make it hard on a really young quarterback. And I think you have to do that. And they even got out coached. Like I'm not a big Deion Sanders hater overall. Like I think he's gotten to this point for a reason, but not calling that timeout when there was like 20 seconds left, letting 10 seconds run off the clock when you could have maybe gotten some points at the end, it did not look good. They just got beaten like every phase of the game, I thought.
Yeah, you mentioned, just letting the clock run out at the end of the half, and I feel like their body language was the biggest thing to me that they didn't even think that they could win the game. I mean, when you look at Shadur's on the sidelines and he has his helmet off and his head down, or Travis Hunter's yelling, he's got his hands up, it just didn't look like this Colorado team had any hope as soon as, they got down to 14-0, 21-0. Their body language is probably what just, I mean, when I saw that, I was like, okay, they know they're not going to win, and everyone else also knows that they're going to get crushed. And in the first quarter, like we talked about, I mean, from the jump, it was all Nebraska. Shadur was sacked 3 times in the first quarter. And I think when you saw that, I mean, it looked like they were running a halfback screen, even at times when they weren't running a halfback screen. So, I mean, the
Yeah.
Nebraska guys were just continuously in the backfield, which was something that stood out to me quite a bit. Yeah, I'm not high on Colorado either. I don't think that they're going to be a great team here, maybe 5 or 6 wins. But yeah, this last night was just a real showing of how many flaws they truly have, and that you can't just always pull guys from major programs and just plug and play them. You have to be able to build somewhat of a program and develop guys, and they just haven't been able to do that at all. And it showed last night. It showed big time.
I think it was one of those things where in every interview that Matt Rule had, he was like, it's about playing together. It's about us playing as a unit and those types of things, which felt, and I don't think Deion Sanders necessarily preaches individuality. Um, like I don't think that that's like his game necessarily, but it does feel like it's the Shador and Travis Hunter show most of the time when you watch that team, and it was just it felt like they were on completely separate sides. That it was like these two guys that were trying to pull this game out in a really tough environment against a group of like a team. And it felt like it wasn't about one player. It wasn't about like, oh, if someone doesn't play well, this team's going to lose. And so I felt like that was a big deal. And in the same way, I just felt like Colorado kind of lacked just control of themselves, kind of like you said, with the body language and things like that. But even sometimes, like in one way, you're like, wow, they're flying around, they're hitting dudes. They had a couple big hits early, but there were a few times where it was like you're getting pretty close to targeting, and they even eventually lost somebody. And so it's like they just seem like a team that kind of runs on vibes, and when the vibes are bad, it goes downhill pretty fast.
It reminds you of like those high school teams that, when they're hitting their stride, they are really good and they look insane. But then as soon as, the slightest inconvenience happens or someone drops a ball, it just creates that snowball effect and things can go downhill pretty quickly. So
Yeah.
looking at last night, we had our big matchup, Big Ten After Dark, if you want to call it, Oregon and Boise State. This was my upset of the week, and I was so, so close to getting it right. I had a lot of people, my comments and my DMs, what are you thinking? Boise State's not going to be close. Well, it was close. I had them by a field goal, and it ended up being the Ducks by a field goal. And a really interesting game. You can look at it from a lot of different ways. I think you have to give credit to Boise State's offense to be able to put up those kind of numbers on Oregon's defense. I think that's really impressive. Ashton Genty, he's a dude. I think he's probably number one in my Heisman race right now, just based on what he's been able to do in the first 2 weeks of the season. But there was a couple errors on the Broncos side, whether it was coaching or special teams, that allowed the Ducks to literally run away with this one as they had a punt return and a kickoff return for a touchdown in the fourth quarter. I want to get your thoughts on this because there's a couple different ways that I looked at this game, and I'm still not exactly sure how I would summarize it, but I want to get your takes first.
Yeah, I think when I look at this game, I think about the most important thing in football is always going to be your coach and your quarterback. And I think that's so important. And I guess I firstly, we're on the same page. Dan Lanning is one of the best coaches in college football, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of where he sits. But my thing is so you got Dylan Gabriel, who's, close to getting his mortgage and everything settled. And, he's been in college football for forever. And I think they want him to be as good as Bo Nix, but he's just not. Like he's not as dynamic. there's just something off about the Oregon offense, and that could be aspects of they lost a couple key starters on the offensive line, but it just seems like this offense is just way less dynamic than it's been in years past. I actually liked their running game yesterday, but it feels like they want to lean they did on Bo Nix, and they just can't. And I think that was the biggest standout thing to me is that like over the past 2 weeks, Dylan Gabriel's numbers, when you look at him in the box score, you're like, wow, he played pretty well. And then you watch him and you're like, that's a terrible sack that you just took. Why aren't you trying to push the ball down the field more? And so I feel like I've been pretty disappointed in him overall.
I was looking at that last night because the weird thing last night is when you look at the Oregon offense, a lot of their touchdowns were big plays. They had the big long ball to Evan Stewart that set up a touchdown. They had Holden, they hit him on that slant when they were in cover zero that he took to the house. And so Boise did pay a lot of times for their aggressiveness, but they also had a lot of success. From what I remember, they probably had 5 or 6 sacks where they were just all out blitzes. They were just bringing the house, and they were able to get to Dylan Gabriel and ultimately allow themselves to get the ball back on offense. But I think I agree with you in the sense that Oregon's offense is going to have to find some sort of chemistry together. I think last year the difference was that you had Bo Nix and Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson, guys that had played together. You had running backs that had been in that program for a while, and so it was a very complete and well organized system. This year they're plugging and playing a lot. Dylan Gabriel comes over from Oklahoma. Evan Stewart comes over from A&M. So I think they're still trying to find their groove. As the year goes on, I do expect them to look a little bit better and more smooth on the offensive side of the ball. But you're right, I think, in the sense that Dylan Gabriel is not going to be Bo Nix. Bo Nix is bigger. He's more composed. He'd also been playing college football forever, but he just had more of that kick, and I think probably just a higher IQ, honestly. Because even when you look at the fourth quarter, um, the drive prior to Oregon going down to win it, is he had two wide open throws to guys that would have been touchdowns, and he missed both of them, just overthrowing them. So I think as the season goes on and you're playing Ohio State at home or Washington or Michigan or these big games, you're not going to be able to just rely on your special teams to house 2 kicks to ultimately give you the win. You're going to have to be able to move the ball on offense and limit those kind of errors. So they do get away with this one. That fourth quarter was chaos. I was taking notes talking about how Boise was getting away from the run game and they're getting too reliant on Maddox Madsen. And as I'm writing that down, Oregon commits 2 turnovers in a span of 2 minutes, and Boise was able to turn those both into touchdowns, which really kind of brought some life back to the game. What did you see in that fourth quarter that stood out to you that really made this game what it was?
Yeah, was it in the fourth quarter when the signal caller, the middle linebacker for Boise State, got kind of taken out of that game,
Yeah,
or was
yeah,
that
I think it was
late
the
third?
fourth or maybe the early third.
For me, I thought that was something where I was like, that changed like the whole like game and how it was moving because I felt like he was sort of probably keeping that defense together. And I think that's when they started to make some of the more significant mistakes. Obviously, they had some turnovers after he left, but it just felt like he was sort of like the soul of their defense. And it was just really tough. And I think it was one of those things where it was like they lost an offensive lineman early, they lose their signal caller a little bit later, and it kind of just felt like it was like a snowball effect that like Boise State was kind of fighting an uphill battle, and eventually it was just too uphill at that point, especially when your special teams is letting things like that happen. It's just demoralizing when you're a defense that's playing so well that essentially held them to 20 points and to still feel like you lost that game. And the same thing, as much as we talk about quarterback and thing for Boise State, it's coach and running back. And I don't understand why they put the ball in Maddox's hands so much and let him decide so much of that game late.
Yeah, I have it in my notes actually. I'll set the scene. It was Boise State had the ball with around 5 minutes left, tie game, and they run the ball with Genty on first down to make it 2nd and 6. So it's second and short, the clock's running. We got about 4:25, 4:30 on the clock. They throw two like short little slant out routes on 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 6. Both are incomplete. They turn the ball over to Oregon with about 4 minutes left in the game, which is an astronomical amount of time to go down and kick a game-winning field goal, especially with how explosive that offense is. To me, that is a coaching mistake. I don't understand why you go away from Genty so early. You had plenty of time to move the ball down the field. Madsen was pretty poor throughout the whole game, I thought. I think he had overall like a 45% completion percentage, so definitely not outstanding. And so when it's second and short in that situation, if you run the ball with Genty, a guy who is consistently picking up 3 to 4 yards per carry, in that situation, if you run it, at the very least, it's third and short. You have an opportunity to run it again, or at the very least, the clock is running and you're able to, if you punt, take it to Oregon with less time on the clock. And maybe that speeds up their offense a little bit more. Maybe you get
Mhm.
another turnover out of that. I just didn't really understand play calling there that puts you at risk at stopping the clock and then giving the ball back to Oregon with probably a minute to a minute and a half more time than there would have been if you would have just ran it right there. Maybe that's too dependent on Genty. Maybe it was too predictable. But I felt like even when Oregon knew that he was going to get the ball, he was still picking up anywhere from 2 to 5 yards per carry.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Go to the guy that's going to win you a Heisman. That's the best player in the country, maybe.
Yeah, I was shocked, especially on the possession prior where he breaks open a touchdown for like 70 yards right through the defense and takes it to the house to give them the lead, maybe to tie it. But I just don't understand why you go away from that. And I think even when we saw Oregon start to pull ahead earlier in that fourth quarter after the kick return was just too much throwing. Maddox Madsen's not a guy that's gonna, move the ball down the field 10 to 15 yards at a time. Yes, he had some quality throws, but that's not why he's there. He's not there to lead the offense. Genty, like he's back there for a reason. Like that's your moneymaker. So I feel like in big situations they had to lean on him. Yes, he had some big time plays, but ultimately that last drive, I felt like hurt the Broncos a little bit. So Oregon escapes 37-34 victory at home. Another close one for the Ducks against an Idaho school, but they complete the sweep of the Idaho non-power five schools. We'll see what how things fare going forward. They have Ohio State coming to town in a couple of weeks, and they have a tough schedule. They have to go to the Big House at Michigan, who we talked about earlier in the show, and they have Washington at home. We'll see how that game fares out, but not an easy schedule for the Ducks. So we'll see how they keep things rolling going. We're gonna get into our next segment here: red light, green light. Kaleb, we talked a little bit about this prior to the show. Red light is something you don't like from the weekend. Green light is something you really like. Do you want to go first, or should I start it off?
I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna go first with my green light. I'm all in. I am all in on Ole Miss this year. I'm on the lane train. I love Jackson Dart. I think he's like the quarterback like spirit animal of Lane Kiffin. He just seems to get the vibe that Lane Kiffin's trying to put off. We've been talking so much about Shadur and Dylan Gabriel and quarterbacks like that, and I think we just forget about the fact that we have like Jackson Dart who's going out there and winning the games he's supposed to. We'll see more when he plays some of those bigger SEC schools how he fares. But I think this is the best Ole Miss team that there's been out there in years, and I think Jackson Dart should be getting like some serious consideration that he's probably going to be in the Heisman conversation near the end of the year.
A good pick. I like that. And I totally agree with Jackson Dart being like Lane Kiffin's long lost son. I mean, I think they're the same person. I checked in on that game at the end and, he has his helmet off. I'm pretty sure he has a do rag on. Like he's got the long blonde locks sticking out the back.
Yeah,
I mean, Kiffin couldn't have asked for a better quarterback. This is the guy who's been waiting for his whole career. My
his
green
last name's
light,
Dart.
yeah, exactly. I mean, this guy's a quarterback waiting to happen. So my green light team we talked about already in the show, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Last year they came into Colorado and got destroyed. They go out in the portal, or not the portal rather, but they recruit Dylan Raiola, Matt Rule. They get some big guys coming in. Nebraska is always one of those programs that seem to have some hype around it, whether they live up to it or not. The last 5 to 10 years, they definitely haven't. But last night was a big game for them with a huge rival. Really, Matt Rule's first time to show himself and prove that he's been building this program to what he said they're going to be. And they went out there and they dominated from start to finish. They were all over Shadur Sanders. Colorado had no answers for them defensively or offensively. And it was just good to see a program like that that's been down in the dumps for so long finally get back on track and win a game that was so meaningful and so big to the program. The Cornhuskers get my first green light of the week.
Yeah, and I've loved all the things I've seen with Matt Rule and even like Will Compton, who's obviously like he's not like a huge star probably from the program, but he's a big star now. And I think they just have like a lot of really good energy. They seem like they're moving together really well as a team. And I think part of that is a testament to Matt Rule, and part of it's a testament to the fact that they have a top recruit at quarterback who seems content with just being one of the guys.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Dylan Raiola rolling to the field, and I mean, you would think it's Patrick Mahomes, and they just dress him down for a college game. Not saying that's how he played, obviously, but
Yeah.
he's got the same number. He's got the arm sleeve. He's got the long hair, kind of the half mullet, half curl look. And I was just really impressed with what I saw from him yesterday. I think that he's going to be a guy that maybe not this year, but whether it's next year or the year after, you're going to see Nebraska in this playoff conversation in the Big Ten simply just due to how talented this kid is and how much he can do with the ball.
Yeah. So do we do our green lights back to back, or is it green light and then we can go red light?
Let's go red
Are we
light. Let's
bouncing
switch it
around?
back to the red light. Yeah, we'll go alternate.
Okay. My red light's going to be Penn State. I love Penn State. I think when that team is cooking, when they have their white out, like they are maybe the most fun environment in college football. And I would want so desperately for that team to play one of those home college football playoff games. I like James Franklin a lot as a coach too, but at some point you got to wonder if you're like stuck in neutral. Like if you keep finishing in the same spot every year, where are you going as a team? Drew Aller is supposed to be, the savior of Penn State football. So is Trace McSorley, Saquon. They've had so many good players over the years, and I'm waiting for this team to win a big game. And this weekend just worried me with you almost lose to Bowling Green. Doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence when they play like the big dogs, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's tough when you look at, I mean, Penn State just throughout the years
And
have
so
had
that
so many
concerns me.
talented guys come through there. Maybe it's one year, they beat Ohio State a couple years at home, a whiteout game, but really under James Franklin, they struggled to win those big games. And I think, when you get to this 12-team playoff, Penn State's always one of those teams where they're consistently 6 through 12, and they're somewhere in between there. No matter how good or how poorly their season goes, you can always find them in that 6 to 12 range. So when the playoff gets expanded, everyone immediately thinks, okay, this is Penn State's chance. They can get in if they can win some big games in the playoff. This could finally be their shot to give a run at the national championship. And even last week, I thought they looked really good. I liked what I saw from Aller with him being able to move the ball deep down the field against West Virginia's defense. And then they turn around this week against a way lesser opponent in Bowling Green. And for whatever reason, they struggle again. And it just feels like they go back to square one with that. So we'll see how they fare throughout the rest of the season. I think they're going to be okay. But if they don't win the big games this year, if they don't beat the Ohio State, the Michigans, um, they're going to have a serious problem on their hands, in my opinion. So my red light this week, my first one, is going to go to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Yes, Penn State looked sloppy, but at least they won. Notre Dame did not win. They paid Northern Illinois $1.4 million to come into South Bend and put a whooping on them as what are they? The Huskies, the Northern Illinois Huskies. They take in over Notre Dame 16-14, and just a really ugly game for Notre Dame. Riley Leonard was very limited in what he did in his production, and looking at last week, when Notre Dame beat Texas A&M, you're looking to say, okay, like Riley Leonard wasn't great, but he was able to make plays on his feet, and he did enough to win the game. Their offense is going to continue to grow as the year expands. Well, this would have been the perfect opportunity to see that offense take a step up, and somehow they managed to take a step back. The running game with Jeremiah Love, I felt like Northern Illinois was able to limit that, and so credit to them. I mean, when you can hold a team like Notre Dame to only 14 points, you're putting yourselves in really good position to come away with a win, and ultimately they were able to do that. And I can't really put my finger on it, but there's just something about this Notre Dame offense to me under Marcus Freeman that just doesn't click. And I don't know if that's a Freeman thing. I don't know if it's because Riley Leonard hasn't been performing to what he was expected to do. But I was just so unimpressed with what I saw from him yesterday. And typically, when he has a bad game, especially against an or not FCS, but a non-Power Five school, you could see, okay, well, Riley Leonard wasn't great, but they were able to get the run game going, and they couldn't get that going either. Jeremiah Love, I think he barely scraped 100 yards rushing, if that. Um, and so for Northern Illinois, they came into South Bend, they had the money in their pocket already, and they were able to come away with a big win. But I think it's more of a red light for Notre Dame than it is probably a green light for Northern Illinois because of the expectations Notre Dame has, especially coming off a big win College Station last week. To come around and come back home in your season opener and lose a game like that, it's just embarrassing, and there's not really any other way to put it.
We were sort of texting about this last night. Both of us really want to like Marcus Freeman. I want Marcus Freeman in the playoffs. I think he's an exciting coach. You saw that a lot with like the energy with Texas A&M, and I think like it kind of concerns me that they went into that game with so much energy. They sort of controlled the line of scrimmage as that game got more and more into the fourth quarter, and then this week they didn't really control the line of scrimmage at all. Which when you're Notre Dame, when you got those guys up there in Indiana, those big offensive linemen, that should be your thing. And
Right.
in the same way, like Riley Leonard, it's sort of like what you know. I want to like Riley Leonard. He had a big win early in the season last year at Duke, and there's just all these aspects that you're like, dang, this guy seems like he has an X factor. And then he goes out and he lays an egg, and you're like, oh, I guess maybe he doesn't. And that just kind of feels like Marcus Freeman and Riley Leonard that you're like, oh, maybe something's gonna happen, and then you're like, I probably not, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's tough, and I don't even know where you go from here for Notre Dame. Obviously, like if they could find a way to win out, probably find their way into the playoff. But their schedule is not hard. I mean, after the win last week at Texas A&M, there's a lot of people saying, okay, like they got past their biggest test for the next 8 or 9 weeks. Um, Come to find out, their biggest test was actually their home opener against a MAC school. So that was really,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough look. Who knows what they look like going forward? Maybe they find their groove, and they're able to win out and get their way into the playoff. But I think this is a similar Notre Dame team that we've seen in years past, where yes, they have some talent, yes, they look good in some big games, but ultimately, when it gets down to the nitty gritty, they're not going to have enough to make a legitimate run at the national championship. And I think we're going to see another year that he's Irish. So I think it's your turn now with a green light. We'll get some positives going.
So I know that this is like gonna be a West Coast pod. Like I know that there's like a got to be a lot of excitement. The West Coast doesn't get their credit, especially in college football. It's because they're always playing so like late at night. So I'm just gonna double down on the USC love and the Lincoln Riley love. I've been a Lincoln Riley hater ever since he left Oklahoma. I didn't like the taste that left in my mouth. I didn't like that he took Caleb Williams with him. But dang it, this team is flying around. Miller Moss looks like he's playing within this offense. And in the same way, like the defense is finally making tackles. Like they're in the right spot and they're making the plays that they need to. Going into the season, I thought USC was definitely one of those teams that it was going to be like, yeah, they're going to be competitive, but in the Big Ten, it's just ultimately not going to be anything. Now they look like a team that might be able to compete over Oregon because I think when you have the most dynamic play caller in college football in Lincoln Riley, it's just an X factor, and I think Miller Moss isn't as good as Caleb Williams, but I think he might be able to run that offense better than Caleb Williams, just because I think it's so much more about like playing within the offense instead of playing within your talent, which I think Caleb did a little bit more last year.
Yeah, USC was really impressive to me. Even last week against LSU when they played that game in Vegas, I expected LSU to kind of come in and dominate the line of scrimmage. Yeah, maybe USC put points on the board, but I honestly thought LSU was going to beat them pretty handedly. And I was impressed from what I saw on both sides of the ball. It just looked, USC's never had a problem with acquiring talent. It's always been about how can they perform together as a unit on the field. And I finally felt like, last weekend, especially defensively, they looked solid. Yes, they allowed some big plays, but we've seen this defense take a step up under their new defensive coordinator. And anytime Lincoln Riley's calling plays, the offense is going to be dynamic, and that's exactly what we've seen. And you mentioned Oregon, where yeah, they looked kind of shaky and rough in their first couple games. USC is on the opposite spectrum of that, where they just look super dominant. They look smooth already in week 2, and I do think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten this year. So I cannot agree there with the Trojans. My green light is Ashton Genty and his Heisman campaign. I think look at his game last night. He had 25 carries for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's monster numbers against the number 7 team in the country, and more specifically, a team that has an emphasis on the line of scrimmage. Dan Lanning comes from that background at Georgia where you have to win in the trenches, whether it's on the offensive line or the defensive line. You have to win that battle at the line of scrimmage. And I felt like the Cowboys really held their, or not the Cowboys, excuse me, the Broncos of Boise State. They really held their own in that sense. And Ashton Genty, I mean, he ran all over this Oregon defense. They showed a graphic last night, but that was his third touchdown of the season, over 70 yards. And we're only 2 weeks into the season. So I think he's going to be a legitimate contender for weeks to come. And I think we're going to see this Boise State team in the playoff conversation. If they can take care of business in the Mountain West, which I do expect them to do, I think they're going to be a legit team in the playoff and not just like, oh, cool, Boise made it into the playoff, like round of applause for them. I think they can legit go in and upset a team if they run into, a Notre Dame in the first round of the playoff. I could see them knocking off a team like that and pulling off an upset, making a legitimate run in the 12-team playoff. But it's going to rely completely on Ashton Genty. I don't think their passing game is that great, but the Heisman train is chugging along for Ashton Genty right now.
I think in the same way though, I think Genty's going to win them like a lot of games, and I think that's pretty clear to see. But I think in the same way, what's really exciting is that the run game isn't going to get worse, but the passing game could very easily get easier or better as the year goes on, as their quarterback gets more experience, as Dirk Cutter's offense kind of takes more form with these players. And I think that could be something that would be really good for Boise State. Like if you're a Boise State fan, that's got to be the most optimistic you'll ever feel after a loss.
100%. It is down to our final red light, I believe. And your turn. What do you got for us?
I'm gonna do something a little bit spunkier. I'm gonna red light just the college football fans. I hopped on Instagram after Colorado lost, and it was like a lot of like, how much longer till we're looking at Dion being on the hot seat? Like Colorado irrelevant was not a factor in college football. They went what was it, like 4-8 last year, and they were still like playing in like primetime games like on ESPN. As long as Dion shows like subtle improvement, which I do think this Colorado team is better than they were last year. I think the offensive line is getting better. I don't Nebraska looked pretty rough, but I think it's getting better. And so I think this whole like Dion's on the hot seat thing, I don't think Dion would have to be terrible for the next 5 years for them to fire him just because he's brought so much relevance to their program. They're selling out the stadium. Like people want to be there in Boulder. And I think that's a feeling that hasn't been there for a while. So I think I'm going to red light college football fans and putting Dion on the hot seat.
I like that. And the thing that fans maybe want Dion on the hot seat, the thing they're not showing on TV is how much money he's putting in the pockets of these people at Colorado and the program. I don't think the athletic director of Colorado is probably complaining about the pay bump he's got since they hired Deion Sanders to be the head coach there. So I agree with you. I have a hard time seeing them letting go of him with how much relevancy and money he's brought to the Colorado football program. My final red light is going to be Michigan quarterback play. I had a feeling this was going to be an issue this weekend against this Texas defense, and it was. Whether it was Davis Warren or it was Alex Orji, they were both terrible. There's no way to put it. Yes, I'm not the biggest Michigan fan. I do have a little Washington bias in me, but regardless of that, it was not hard to see that Michigan has a legit problem at the quarterback position. I just think that in order for them to be successful this year, you have to be able to have a balanced attack on offense. You cannot be completely reliant on your run game with Donovan Edwards. And that's how it was yesterday. They thought that Donovan Edwards was going to be able to make the game close. They could rely on the run game, and they just couldn't move the ball downfield through the air. And so for the weeks to come, when they play these tougher opponents and these Big Ten defenses, they're going to have to find a way to move the ball downfield with their quarterbacks. And I'm just not sure if they're going to be able to do that. And so to me, that's a big problem. And I could honestly see Michigan dropping quite a bit this season. I do think at their ceiling that they are a top 10, top 12 team at the max. But I could also see them, losing another 3 or 4 games simply because of their lack of skill at the quarterback position.
And I think in the same way, we're looking at like a team that's just significantly less talented than a lot of the teams in the Big Ten, whether it's USC, Washington, even Penn State, who was, I wasn't super fond of, and then obviously like Ohio State. And we talked about this a little bit, but like Alex Orji should probably just start, and they should be content with the fact that it's like we're going to throw the ball 12 times a game. We're going to try to control the clock as much as possible. All of our targets are going to go to Loveland, and just like live into that. Live into the fact that like you might be able to beat Ohio State if it gets to be like a gross like game that's like 17-13. And there's no shame in that. But I think that's how this team's going to win football games. They're not going to win football games being like we're going to throw 70-yard bombs.
Thing that sticks out to me the most is that how talented of a program Michigan is. The fact that they have a hole at the most key position on the field, really interesting to me. Like you would think that after JJ McCarthy leaves, they should be like, oh well, we got this new guy coming in and he's going to pick up right where he left off. And you just don't really have that. I mean, you see with a lot of programs, Alabama's a prime example, Ohio State, where one guy takes off for the NFL and they have another guy in the background waiting to just come and take that spot. And it allows that offense to pick up right where they left off the year prior. And the Michigan team, it's just not the case this year. I think Davis Warren, I mean, I couldn't even pick up anything that I thought he did well yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like any pass that was beyond 5 yards down the field, it was just waiting to get picked or waiting for a Texas defender to make a play on it. Almost like they were just kind of baiting him in to throw it. And then when Orgy comes in, I mean, yeah, he's not super talented with his arm. He's going to run the ball a lot. So I agree with you there with the sense that you kind of just have to buy in the fact that you're not going to be able to throw the ball 20 to 25 times a game. It's going to be very limited with what you can do. And it's just going to have to be smash mouth football, like what we saw last year when they played Penn State, where you're running the ball 20 to 25 times consecutively, just pounding the ball down people's throat. So that is going to be it for red light, green light. We're going to get into our final segment here, prime time pick'em. This was your segment. You wanted to do this, so I'm going to give you the ropes.
So yeah, so basically we're just gonna make our picks for the Sunday night and the Monday night games. So we got the Lions and the Rams, and then we got the 49ers and the Jets. And I figure we can just sort of give our picks and why. I figured we'll just start with the Sunday night game. And so I'll let you make your pick first. Lions, Rams. Who do you think is coming out on top in this one?
I'm going to take the Lions in somewhat handed fashion. I think the team that's going to pick up right where they left off last year. I think they're hungry. I expect another big year from Jared Goff. I understand Stafford's coming back to town, and I do think it'll be somewhat close in the first half, but I think Detroit is now one of those teams that we're going to consistently see in the hunt in the NFC. I expect to see that backfield of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery really be deadly. And I expect a massive year from Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think the Detroit offense ultimately going to be too much to handle for the Rams defense, especially with Aaron Donald being out or retired now. And I think this Lions defense is scrappy. I think they're going to turn Stafford over. They're going to get some key stops. I think they're going to play Dan Campbell, nasty football. They're going to bite your kneecaps off kind of mentality. And so I have the Lions picking up their first win of the season tonight on Sunday night.
I'm in the same spot as you, and I think we underrate a lot in the NFL, like coaching and sort of lack of change within the ecosystem. And the Lions somehow did not lose either of their terrific coordinators to head coaching jobs. And I think that's going to mean a lot for them. There's a lot of consistency rolling over into this year. I think Jameson Williams is going to be a breakout player for them. He kind of started to bring it on a little bit at the end of last year. And the Lions are just a better football team right now than the Rams. They're a more stable, more consistent football team. Also, this is the first time in a long time that the Lions are going into the season, and it's like they are the team in the NFC for a lot of people. Like, this is the team that's supposed to go to the Super Bowl. And I can imagine that, the Lions fans are going to be excited. And this Lions team is just ready to like give the fans a team that they can be like really excited for consistently throughout the year. And I think Jared Goff probably still like he probably wouldn't say it, but he's got a little beef still. I mean, they gave up a first round pick so that they could just get rid of him. And so I think he wants to make that trade a little bit more even and get a Super Bowl ring for himself.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at the matchup, and I mean, when that trade went down, it was just so crazy, right? You're like, oh, like what a big haul. Like the Rams get Stafford, but they give up Goff. At the time, a lot of people weren't super high on Goff. He had kind of been on the decline after that Super Bowl run where they lost to our Patriots, fortunately. So his stock just wasn't super high. and he's been able to really turn his career back around. I think he's been super productive, and he's not a guy that he's going to go air it out for 400, 500 yards a game, but he's going to play within the system. He's going to make the right reads off of play action. He's going to find his targets when he needs to, and just play complementary football. And I think that's what this line is all about this season, and that's why I have them winning. So
So as we move into the Jets and 49ers, what do you think? This is I think this is one of the weirdest games of the weekend.
it's super weird to me. I mean, the Niners are a team that, for whatever reason, I've seen a lot of things in the media about like them not being super high on San Francisco. I don't know if that's because of Brandon Ayuk sitting out or Trent Johnson. No, Trent Williams, excuse me, not. I don't even think that's a real person. Um,
Probably is someone. Shout out Trent Johnson.
Facts. Um, I mean, I just think so maybe it's the contract negotiations that aren't going well. I really have no idea why teams aren't high on San Francisco this year. I think they're going to be legit. When you look at the Jets, it's like Aaron Rodgers is back, but he hasn't played football in 2 years. We've seen him on McAfee more than we've seen him on the football field the last year and a half. And so it's just hard to tell what this New York team is going to look like. Ultimately, I'm going to ride with the Niners tonight just because I think they're going to have that chemistry and they're going to be able to just out talent the Jets, especially on the offensive end. But I wouldn't be shocked if New York makes this game close, even if they find a way to win. But I do still think the Niners are just a more talented team, and I think they're the more well put together team.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same camp as you when looking at like why we're down on the 49ers. I'm not sure. Shanahan seems to make this team competitive like every single year. They're just as talented as they've been in years past. If not, they added some more players, especially when their first round receiver gets back from being shot. Which in a weird way, it could really make this team like rally. Like when you have a teammate that gets shot, I can't imagine that wouldn't, get you a little bit like, hey, let's go get him a game ball. Let's go win this game for him. Uh,
Yeah.
the one spot that I'm in, and this is purely probably growing up just absolutely despising the Jets. I picked them to finish second in the AFC East, and for some reason that just hurt my heart to ever put them ahead of the Patriots. But past all that, I legitimately just do not see it. So what we have on their team is we have guys like Tyron Smith, we have Aaron Rodgers, and we have Mike Williams. These are three guys that they're really banking on being really huge contributors for their team this year. And they play on the worst field in the NFL. And these are guys that over the last couple of years have been hurt all the time. And so I don't understand why we're like, oh yeah, those guys are going to show up, play on that field, and they're going to play a full 17 game season. I like their defense. I think it's weird that they don't have Hassan Reddick back. I think that's definitely going to cause a rift for that team because I think they were really banking on him to do a lot. And I think the Jets are definitely going to be better than they were last year. I think Aaron Rodgers, if he plays, 12 of the games this year, they're just going to be better just because their quarterback play was so terrible last year. And I think he takes over a lot of the play calling from Nathaniel Hackett, who I think is just, he's like a phantom coach out there.
Yeah. I mean, anyone that coaches, like similar with Brady, I guess, in the sense of like, Josh McDaniels was a really good offensive coordinator, but never going to be like, oh yeah, Brady was really good because Josh McDaniels was calling the plays. It's kind of the
Yeah.
same thing with Hackett. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has been in the league for so long that he's going to essentially do what he wants. And I agree. I think New York's a weird team. I think you could almost, in a weird way, compare them to Colorado in the sense that a lot of hype, a lot of talent that they've acquired, but we're not really sure if it's all going to be able to piece together how they want it to. And I do think it's going to take a little bit for them to get going. I ultimately think that they're going to be a playoff team this year, probably in the wild card spot. I think Buffalo takes the division. But yeah, this Jets team is just weird to me. I think it's going to take time for them to get it figured out. But they play in New York. They're in a big market. So, the media is going to be all over that. So, interesting game on Monday night. I am excited to see how Purdy and the boys look offensively. And I think this Niners season is going to go one of two ways. I think they're either going to be so hungry from, they could essentially taste the Lombardi Trophy last year and then just get back in the hunt and go win it. Or I could see them being like, we've gotten so close so many times. all our players want max contracts, and we don't have the money to pay every.
Yeah.
At some point, they're gonna have to pay Purdy. I mean, they're giving a minimum wage at this point to be a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting. So two really intriguing teams Monday night facing off. One with the Niners on it. Sounds like you have them too.
You
Um,
and you can't tell me that you in your mind you can't see like the New York Post article that says like Rodgers wants Salah out. Like that, like if things go south, like game six, that's coming out.
oh, 100%. Like Aaron Rodgers and Coach Robert Saleh have a huge argument over COVID vaccine debate. Rodgers wants Saleh out as head coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are our primetime picks. And that's probably going to wrap it up. It's been a pretty lengthy episode, Caleb. We appreciate you
Oh
for
yeah.
having it on. We're going to have to do this a lot more. Be sure to go check out Quad Culture. You're on Instagram now, I saw, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all this stuff. Just trying to get as much stuff out as possible. I've loved all the stuff you're coming out with. I feel like every time I listen to you, I know more about college football. So
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's a colliding of the world. I appreciate you for having on. We're just two small content creators trying to make a big dream happen. So good stuff. Keep it rolling, and I'm sure we'll have a couple more of these here in the near future.
and the Patriots are back. You heard it
Patriots
here.
are back, baby. I know a half on the Bengals. Let's go.
All right. See you, Carter.
All right, see you, man. Have a good one.